This is a follow-up conversation with Al Pesso. Hi, Al.
Hi, Serge.
So, what actually happens during a group session? What's the process?
Okay, we start the group off with just a check-in. If it's a new group, they all say their name and what they do and their goals. And very often they get moved for some reason as they talk. And I might highlight some of the elements that we might attend to lined up with what they just said. After that, I tell them about the procedure, et cetera, and they know the format. And then we ask people who would like to begin, and we make it clear that while the person is working, that it's their responsibility to bring the work to a good end. And then we have a timer, a 40-minute timer, and says they have 10 more minutes to bring it to a good end. And that it is their responsibility, so that we don't just repeat the old stuff. And my responsibility to be their resource and their helper to bring it to a good end.
So bring it to a good end is an important part of this. Should we talk about it now, or just keep it, in mind for later?
The good end means that we do reversals, that we make a new memory, that the whole feature here is not insight, but new memory, because we see the present through the lens of history, through memory. So we make a new memory, and immediately people's perception of the present shifts. It's a startling neurological reality.
Okay, so very, very important in this process is insight in itself. Not only is not necessarily good, but could be bad. The point is creating a new experience from which a new memory can emerge.
Exactly, and the experience is posited as if it had happened in the past. And that's part of the ritual thing, that we're not in a present relationship, that we touch and present the new memory to that part of the brain that contains their body image and memory of that time. So we're putting it into long-term memory, I believe, and not into short-term memory. And I think the ritual factor helps it do such a thing. I don't know if neurologically that's possible, but that's what we aim for. And I also highlight to the group that since people respond instantly to what they see and respond instantly to what they hear, that the group should not speak or talk and respond during the person's work, because then the person will start relating to the group. But the group relates immediately to the person who's working, and they identify with it because it is so real. And sometimes they'll tear up and they'll remember their own issues, but we don't attend to it at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
So clearly the focus is on the person working, and
That's
everything
right.
is around that.
That's right. So we don't do group process during the procedure. Sometimes we do group process. So let's say we finish the work, and I'll talk about finishing the work, which we didn't do before. Then I'll say, now it's the time for sharing. And in the sharing, they speak about their own personal experience without directing their commentary to the one who worked. So the person doesn't feel, they get interrupted from that quality they have at the end of the structure. They're in that other state.
Yeah.
And they're absorbing it. And then I make certain that people don't make corrections or questions or criticism of the work, because that would really disturb the person at work. But they have ample opportunity to say, this is what happened to me. I saw so much what my family was like, just like his family or her family. And I remember a situation so vividly. I hadn't thought about it in 20 years, but stuff like that comes up. Mm-hmm. And then they begin to know what they want to work on in their own work.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the end of the work, which we didn't do in the earlier part. If it was in a group, some two people would have enrolled as the ideal mother and the ideal father and be placed at the client's choice in proximity to them, so that they can get a tactile memory and an auditory memory and a visual memory. Because as the ideal parents talk, they might say, if we'd been your ideal parents, we would, and if they were directed to say it, your ideal father and I would be happily married, and I would never be distressed. And then the client would look up and see their faces, and I would direct that they look at each other. So he would see a visual sense of unity instead of that gap that he saw between his mother and father. And then what happens at that point is oxytocin starts to flow. They feel part of the whole nesting thing. And they say, oh my God, if they were together, like I could lean back. I say, well, why don't you lean back then? And they would feel that, and they may close their eyes or say that. And then I say, and they say, it feels, I could have been so peaceful. So I say, experience that peacefulness as your child image. And that's an important thing, Serge. It's surprising. They feel it now, and they say, that feels great. And then the ideal parents would say, if we'd been your ideal parents, you would have felt this peaceful with us when you were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And when they do, they say, oh my gosh, the difference between the two states, just because you say the words back then, and they go back then in their psyche, it gets planted somewhere else. And then they say, the world looks bright, I can see flowers. Yeah. And then the ideal parents say, if we'd been your ideal parents, you could have seen flowers when you... So we use their language to fulfill the dialogue as it goes.
So it's really not just a concept. It's not just but you really live it, and you stay with it, and you go deeper with it. So there is that sense of really absorbing it as an experience at that time.
And then it takes a certain understanding of timing from the therapist. They might close their eyes and they just sink into it, or they may suddenly bounce up and say, oh, that was great. And I said, you landed the plane too abruptly. I think you jumped out with a parachute. So let's, because and I say, they say, well, I don't know if you have enough time. I say, just finish it and see, let it have an organismic end. And then they'll go back into it and they'll feel it. And then I just wait, unless they have something to say. They're absorbing it. And then I might repeat, experience it at the age when you needed that. And now they've got the tactile, the visual, and maybe not only the auditory, but maybe even the smell. Because I think there's such a big thing about odor. Of course, it isn't real, they're real parents, but they're breathing a different sense of air at that time. And then an interesting thing happens. While their eyes are closed, they may nod their head, and you see the things, because it is an organismic thing, and when it's over, it has a sense of closure. They'll nod their head, but I don't interrupt. And then little by little, they open their eyes and they look at me directly. They're no longer in the hypothetical past. They say, that's it. I got it now. And then I say, are you ready for derolling? They say, yes. And we start derolling first the placeholders, each object, and it gets removed ritually. This is no longer a placeholder for your boss. Oh, we had to move that principle, remember? Yeah. We might get then, if it's a group, we get somebody to be, we say, you want to pick, before this time, I have to jump back a bit. Before we'd come to the ending, we'd have moved that. And I'd forgotten that sequence. But they say, pick someone to be a principal mover, and they pick so-and-so. And I've taught them this ritual. They stand up as if they were in some kind of chapel or a setting of some religious setting. And they'll stand up and then they'll walk to that object, kneel down, and then carefully reach forward and grasp that object, and then move it over to where it belongs. Take it off the placeholder for the boss, put it on the father, and then they'll look at the boss and they say, he's just the boss now. It's amazing. Before, if I thought of him, I'd get all pissed off and everything. And now I say, okay, he's my boss. So they've already shifted their perception of the boss. It seems ridiculously simple, but it happens. It happens, just like I said. And then we remove that placeholder, all the other placeholders. Then we do the movies. They say, now this is no longer the movie of your mother with an ideal husband. Or then if they had to, they might have done a movie with a mother as a little child, having ideal parents who would have supplied her with her needs, whatever other movies had come up. We take that apart, and then we kind of wipe out, I say, and then we'll remove that voice that we had. Remember, there was a voice of truth, and I'll sort of wipe it out of the air. I say it's no longer there, and we'll wipe out the witness figure. And then the ideal parent, I say, are you ready for the ideal parents to deroll? Sometimes they say, yeah. And sometimes they say, wait a minute, no, I want a little more. They'll go back, and they'll say, they'll take another taste. They say, okay, now. And the person says, they're both together. They each say, I am no longer role-playing your ideal mother. The other one says, ideal father. I'm myself. They say their name. So it isn't linked to the real person, except they'll remember the real person being the carrier of that, and then they'll step away. And then I told the people, in the sharing, or afterwards, during breaks, talk to each other as you ordinarily would in your social sense, but don't say in a humorous way, how's my kid doing? How's my... You say, don't do that. Keep separate the ritual relationship and then your own personal social thing. Let's not combine the two. Yeah. So I make that part of the clarity. And then the person sits down, and then I say the thing we were talking about before, let's do sharing now. And then people will talk about what happened to them as they watch that. And that could be very moving. And it could begin to prepare some people to do the work that they're going to do next.
Yeah. So as this is happening in the group, what is the body experience of, the person who is working? How is it paid attention to?
I watched that all. I didn't say too much about it. I watched it all around, all through. I will watch their posture, and sometimes I might note certain kinds of actions they're doing in gestural actions, and say you're holding and hugging yourself. That we call that a self-self interaction. Would you like the ideal parents to put their arms around you the way you're putting your arms around yourself? So I attend to that. Or they'll say, I'm feeling my chest is aching at some point. And then I'll say, let's explore what that could be. And sometimes it's useful to take a deep breath, tighten your muscles around the achy spot, see what sounds come, what movements come, or what emotions come. And they'll go, and I say, what was that? They say, my God, it sounds like I was in agony, or that I was crying. I said, well, see what happens if you let that feeling come out. And then they might sob and cry. And then they'll say, yeah, and the witness, I see how much grief you feel as you remember how it had been. And I sometimes call that a relief grief sequence. Sometimes they feel absolutely, they say, oh, I feel so good. And the next moment they tear up. So when they feel the good, they can contrast it with how bad it had been. And that's a better time to feel grief when there's no alternative. You know, when people feel grief because it's just empty, but not the flavor of what could have been, it's a horrifying grief. And that would be like the stuff of the primal scream, where it's endless grief because there's no alternative. Yeah. So then I can say, we call that the relief grief sequence. And the witness, I see how much grief you feel when you remember how bad it had been. And then they'll say, oh, I feel like a load is off my chest, my shoulders are dropped. And I'll attend to all the motor things, which I always do, but I didn't bring it up now because of I do this so automatically, right, from what I've done in the past. But we pay attention to all the shifts in the body, because if they something, they say, oh, that's good, I feel fine now. And I can hear in their tone and the way they move away that it isn't real. So I look for authentic reports or as if reports when they're trying to just comply with what they think you're anticipating. So depending on what they do, I will make an intervention. If their body is loaded, if their vocal tones shift, if their facial expression shows something different than what they're saying. So I track it all with the witnessing, and sometimes I just track it by making observations.
Yeah, and the focus again is on the person working, but the people who are playing roles, you're not tracking, but you're doing is you might be giving them some directions of, some things to say or to act or do.
I'll give them directions, usually just to use their phrase. That I don't invent new things. If they say, my mother and father really loved each other this way, it feels wonderful. And so they say, if we were your ideal parents, we would have loved each other this way. Mm-hmm. So I make their dialogue based on his rather than make interpretations with what I think he needs.
Yeah.
I follow the track of where they are.
Yeah. So, what you're describing gives a very good sense of the room being a ritual space.
Exactly.
And that's something that is very much about a deep reality taking place, but not an everyday reality.
Exactly. I call that Kairos time. Kairos in contrast to Chronos time, which is everyday reality, which has no depth. But in the Kairos time, real things are happening that make a difference. And that's still part of the ritual thing. And sometimes some people just do a whole as if thing, and I find there are different ways to deal with that. And I look to see if they're in Kairos time, which also could be called structure time. The work is called a structure. Are they really in it, or are they just kind of like having a dialogue with the therapist and not really in the relationship with the ideal figures?
And so, through experience, intuition, observation, you have developed a sense of being able to tell when a person is in Kairos time versus in Chronos time.
Exactly.
So, can you say a little bit more about that, about what happens, either, signs you pick up, effect it has on you, intuition? What is it that, in a way allows you to monitor the nature of the time?
I'll do it this way. When people are supervised in this work, they're supervised via videotape. They bring in a video. And then I'll see if it's in a group the way we used to do it, there would be the client. And around the client is ideal mother and father. And somewhere in the room is the real mother and father. Somewhere in the room is brother and sister. Somewhere in the room is maybe the boss or object, and they paying absolutely no attention to the figures. They're just talking endlessly with the therapist. And then that's telling me. So if I'm leading, I'm saying, are they only attending to me, or are they really in that situation and in that age and relating to those figures? And I think that's the dancer, the dramatist in me that's looking, are they in that play, or are they just talking about it, Mm-hmm. And so I tend to that. And I couldn't tell you specifically what I do, because I would do different things at different moments.
Yes, but what I'm hearing is there is a quality of sensing that the person is involved with the figures of their past in such a way that they become very real for them at the moment.
Absolutely. Even when they're looking at the placeholders, even here we're doing a movie, and you have one shell being the mother as a young woman, another shell as the mother's ideal husband, not a second husband, ideal first husband. And then I'll do a little pantomime. I'll pick up the one of the husband, and I'll move him like he's talking. He says, if I had been your, I would love you. Now they're looking at these shells rattling at each other. They don't see shells anymore. Mm-hmm. They're seeing their mother with an ideal husband. So when you use the words and you use the pantomime, they are seeing very powerful images. And I'm tracking what I think is going on in their brain while they are gazing. I think I've gotten some awareness of that. I don't know. So I'm tracking their interior, not just the exterior. I'm tracking what I think is going on in their brain, whether they are in that state when they're seeing vivid things and not just simply looking at these little objects in the room.
Yeah, but so very much in a way that's what's happening is that the correlation to the experience you're describing is a mind state where there's a certain level of waves of things that we may or may not at this point be able to measure, with instruments, but that corresponds to a certain functioning of the brain where it is in a receptive mode for resetting.
Perfectly said. Absolutely. And I can look at that kind of condition and see it from their face and their expression and make that assumption that they're in that state. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So, in a way, what we're talking about is that, you're not going to be able to help people change something that's been a profound experience unless they're brought in a place where the functioning of the brain is that in that more malleable state or that more magma, volcanic state where there is a possibility of reshaping.
I wish to God I knew how to teach people to note that, because some people don't see that at all, and they do this. Let me give you a little example. It's a funny example. We used to have a very big estate up in New Hampshire with a lake. It was Baba Ram Das's father's estate, and he had his ashram there. Anyway, but we had a lake, and I never learned how to swim. And I had someone from Holland who brought their 2 children there, and they were swimming like crazy. And the mother was trying to teach me how to swim. And the kids would watch, and then I would do it. And then they came up to the mother and they say, he does all the right moves, but he doesn't swim. So I've learned to see some people do all the right moves, but there's no swimming going on. Mm-hmm. And somehow I've got the flavor. I look for that. And for some people, they don't get the sense of drama or whatever it is or that other state. And they do externals. They know all the steps and how to get, the ones who really do this stuff, they tune right into that. It makes a world of difference. And that's one of those unteachable things,
Right. So that's the ability of the person to go themselves into Kairos time.
Yeah.
Where they're going to be, in a way, in that mode that is going to enable the perception of that state.
And the therapist has got to be aware of that and join them in that ritual fashion. So the therapist is a teacher, is I don't know, maybe it has to be a little bit of a priest in a way too, and as well. So many things, so many different roles are going on simultaneously in the therapist, actually.
Yeah. So when, the part of priest might be that sense of, that deep knowledge of what that Kairos time is.
Yes.
That it enough that you're able to draw people into it.
Yep. And that's something that is in some people automatically. Some people slowly develop it, but that's essential in the training of this work.
So for you, if you think back about your process over the years, do you see stages in which that own part of you has developed? Is it a part that you've always been aware of and existed? Is there a part where you've become more and more conscious of it? How can you trace your own history with it?
I think to some small degree I always had it. I think. Well, here's what comes to my mind. I go to the synagogue every Friday and every Saturday with my father. And as one of the, I don't know what the word is, things that you do, you make choices to be part of the ceremony with the Torahs, in the synagogue, and you select to do that honor. And he very often would have me have the honor of holding the little baby Torah. They big out the big ones and little bit, and then we have this ceremony walking around the synagogue, and people would reach out with their the talis, the scarves at the edge, and they touch the Torah and kiss it. So I was part of that ritual of sanctity. And I think I got that quality there at that time. And I think I got it also with Martha Graham. When she was like, I moved from Judaism to Martha Grahamism, I think. And that thing of a ritual where you're touching the deep, she would do the Greek tragedies and things like that. And the errand into the maze and some of the other, where she was right in there, and she did it in the dance classes. You could capture it, and little by little, I think I learned to do it on the stage, and little by little, I learned how to do it with the work. And when I first started doing the work, I think I was in an altered state, and I felt like it wasn't me doing it. I'd get out of it, and I'd just be my ordinary self. But I think during it, I was in an altered state. Now I know I'm doing it in another way. I can do that, but I'm in a much more relaxed state, and I'm feeling like I'm having an exquisite sport or game or art that is just appealing and relaxing. So I'm not drained from it. And everybody who's trained in this work talks about feeling more relaxed. It's almost like play. Mm-hmm, except you're not laughing and you're not making it, kind of meaningless. So it's an odd thing. So I think I've had that kind of transition to first knowing sacred things where people are really believing they're in touch with the spiritual and the quality that gives. And then I found that in theater, I found that in dance, and I find that with artists. And I guess I automatically bring that to the work. And the people, very often it's people who are artists or who are psychiatrists who really play an instrument. One of my top people plays a violin, Dr. Lois Perquin. He's a top psychiatrist in Holland. And it's his musicality, and his father was a director of theater. So I think some people bring that, but other people don't, but they cultivate it. I find out where their heart is, and I help them to awaken the metaphors about where they're really touched and somehow bring that to bear. Mm-hmm. So the therapist's heart has got to be there, but not in the possibility sphere as the player, but as the supporter of that state. Yeah. And to make sure there's no breakage of it, and not to be the supplier of healing, but the supporter of the healing process with the role players who are doing it.
Yeah, the supporter of the healing process, the person who leads into the space, who supports the space. So that feels like a very moving sense of what the experience, the role of the therapist and the experience of the therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. And people who have been leading traditional groups, they get exhausted, they tell me. And then when they learn to do this, they say, what a relief it is to do this, that they are now outside. Someone else is doing the healing, and they say, I go home relaxed. Mm-hmm. So I'm finding that people who learn how to lead, and there are many hundreds now who do this, or maybe thousands, and I hear that report over and over and over again, that it doesn't exhaust them because they're not in a transferential state where they have to be the one that is holding the person together, but the ideal figures are doing that.
Right. So you're holding the space.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right. And I have to say another thing. When I'm working, of course I've had 50 years of experience and I can trust my intuition, but I call it the boys and girls in the back room, that while I'm working, I'm open to all my own associations, and suddenly the most ridiculous possibilities come to my mind, and I kind of filter them through some part, and I might use what comes up. And I think every human being has incredible creativity back there that they have to learn how to be in touch with, because that part of the brain is working all the time, day and night, without strain, and organizing things that we have learned. And to learn to be in touch with that, I think, is important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is describing what happens in a group. So now what happens when you don't have people in the group physically taking on these roles?
Okay.
What's the work like?
It's surprisingly effective. And let me tell you, I also do this over the telephone where I don't even see the people. So I'm tuned in to their vocalizations as they speak. And they'll say, oh, and my mother did this. I say, well, pick an object to be your placeholder for your mother. I say, what did you pick? Where did you put it? So I try to see. And then I'll say, let's make what we call a bookmark. And imagine right over your right shoulder is an ideal mother who would have up. And then they'll get that feeling. And they say, oh, that makes me lean back in the chair. And I say, well, why don't we use a part of the chair to role play ideal mother? So I'll try to, sometimes I'll use objects. Or they'll say, I really need to be held. And so get a shawl, put it around your shoulder, wrap it in front of you, and we'll have that enroll as your ideal mother and her arms around you. So I try to be creative, depending on what would be believable, what's at hand with them. And I do pretty much the same kind of thing. And I'll witness based on their tonality. So I've learned very much how to witness on the very, very minute shifts in the expression. But I've learned, I suppose, without trying, how to hear the tone in the volume of the voice and the tonality, because emotions come through the right hemisphere and affect the tonality. That's part of speech. There's speech that is purely cognitive. It's the left hemisphere. But then there's the right hemisphere. And animals have that. And I've learned how to hear in the tonality the emotional qualities that might be there. And I'll name that as well.
Yeah. So definitely that what's happening is the emotional qualities are very present. But what I'm hearing in addition is a sense of, even in the work when the person is, when it's one-on-one, and even when it's on the phone, a sense of using placeholders and of take this little thing and this, or take, the armchair or part of the chair, something. Exactly. So there is, so what's it like? What is that, what's that experience of actually naming something to be a placeholder? What happens with that?
Well, first of all, the placeholders are chosen for the real figures, and then the ideal figures I don't call placeholders. I would call it a bookmark. Bookmark means it's in the air for the ideal mother. And then the chair wouldn't be a placeholder. The chair will be role playing the ideal mother. Okay. So then they'll tell me this sensory thing as they lean back or what happens. And
so then it gives you an experience of interacting.
Absolutely.
So it's not something, in a way, you move it from the as-if quality, but by giving it a physicality of saying it's there, then you have to face it and relate to it.
Exactly. But let me tell you something that is an absolute contradiction of that happens a very small percentage of time. I'm remembering a group I led in London recently with therapists, and it was a large group, and we had all people play it, and most of the time there was nobody there, just objects, and she had really was moved with the ideal mother. She felt her in the air around her, and she had enough of a sensory motor memory to feel a sensory reaction to just her thoughts and the words. Mm-hmm. And then I said, just to enhance it, I said, would you like to have an actual person? They said, no, I'd rather not.
Yeah.
So for that particular person, they felt it strongly enough. And if we had a person there, some part of her, she said, would no longer believe it, which is maybe she needs some more work to believe in real people and all that.
But what I'm hearing there is really that very accentuating that sense of what this process is about, is giving an opportunity for people to feel more intensely the presence of these people, actual people or missing people.
Well, the reason they could have that and believe it is because our genes are anticipating. So remember we talked about shape. Our genes are anticipating just that. And you give it the right verbal message, which translates into a motor message. The genes say yes. They can imagine leaning back. They can imagine snuggling in the neck of. And so we're not just making fantasy, we're making genetic expectation explicit. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes there's something else that was coming in that. What was I thinking? No, I can't get it at this moment. But there's an internal receptivity and anticipation of all these things. And I found ways to awaken that.
Right.
So I know what I was talking about. I know. Okay. Sometimes I say, well, you don't believe it, the ideal parents. And they said, well, if it was a dog, my dog, I would believe it. So I put a placeholder for the dog, and I put the principle of ideal mother on the dog. And the ideal mother says, if I was your ideal mother, I would be as faithful and caring of you as the dog is. Mm. So we begin to link it up sort of that way. And sometimes it's a tree. Sometimes it's a mountain, because I look at what they already are ready to believe in a transferential way, but not in a human interaction way, where the answers would be. And very often people have spiritual answers. We'll have an image of God in the air. And they say, God hears me, God attends to me. Because when we don't have people as an answer, we get a spiritual answer. But I'm saying that our basic human needs have to be with a human interaction. So I then make the principle of the ideal parent is in God, and somehow we can move those around. Anyway, these are some of the complex steps.
Yes, but these are complex steps, but also what I'm hearing is while they're complex, they're also very grounded, because you made the point, this is not fantasy.
Exactly.
This is not somebody else's vision of reality.
That's right.
This is about helping somebody, we all have some things that are very powerfully stored inside, and you're giving an opportunity for these things to be present in the room.
Exactly. And then we work with it and move it finally, hopefully, to human interaction, which is what our genes are anticipating. And when they don't get it, people they store that wonder in different banks that have not collapsed like their real mother or their real father. Those banks have gone bankrupt. So they put it where it's safe. Some people put it in horses. Some people put it in God. Some people put it in the atmosphere. So I have to look at what they really believe in and what they really trust. And then I try to imagine with them what the essences of that are.
Yep. Yeah, so again, I'm struck as you're describing this of what people believe in, what they trust, and what happens in your own lifetime, but also in terms of parents and, the presence of the ancestors, the beliefs. So again, that how consistent it is with thinking of it as a ritual and as something that puts you in touch with these things that are larger than the everyday perception of things.
You're hitting that point over and over, and very, very importantly so, because I'm not sure how many therapists are working on a ritual base. They're working on a here and now base, and and say, I'm going to help you. And it's not a ritual anymore. It's happening in the here and now.
Yeah.
And I think that...
And what strikes me again is to make the point, as you're talking, that it's a ritual space, but it's not ritual as a way of saying bypassing reality or bypassing, very, presence. It's deeply anchored in reality.
Absolutely. 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 And the fact of it being a ritual means we can condense and collapse time and put that event that's happening now in the past and put it where it had been anticipated. Without that ritual setting, I'm not so sure it goes back there. It becomes a healing in the present, and they learn how to overcome something in the past by getting strong in the present, which is good. Sometimes that's the best. And that's a coping system. So I'm not teaching them so much to cope, but to change history so that they have the energy to deal with all the imperfections of reality.
Yeah, yeah. So it brings to mind what you said before at some point in the conversation about having that quality without having the dogma. So it's kind of finding the strength of transformative healing that old ancient traditions have.
Yeah, you're putting that.
Yeah.
I just got to tell you, you're putting that so beautifully. I just have to tell you. Okay, go on again.
But really, that strong sense of connecting with that deep need that we've had. That from way back when, probably in the caves. Of finding that ability to go at a level of the human experience that is healing in a transformative way. But anchoring it in an observation, paying attention to what happens in a worldview that is not limited by dogma and fear.
That's true. And right in the midst of all that is touching the element that is so profound in people, the longing for meaning. And we then say that this is a meaningful universe where everything counts. Because when people are living a life of disaster, they say, God has abandoned me, there's no meaning on earth. And you get that whole other way of looking at the world. And when we connect, I think the longing for meaning is genetic and innate. And I try to tap in on that and the different ways that people find ultimate meaning.
So, in a way, it brings me to the question we had alluded to before, in the pre-conversation, is a sense of what's it like for the therapist to do this kind of work. And as I'm hearing you, I have a sense of, in a way, the therapist as a person who is affirming the possibility of meaning.
Yes, for sure. And it enriches it in myself and in the therapist. But the other thing is, it is peace-giving inside. It reaffirms. People say over and over again, I'm so glad I learned this training because I can do this work without being exhausted. That I have to say that over and over again because I'm told that over and over. And that says that's some important shift between the way they learn to do therapy and where they're learning to do this particular form of therapy. It feels more like play, and some of them say they have more energy at the end than they had at the beginning. So I don't know how to describe that in any other way.
Yeah, so maybe that part of, in a way, having the experience of being in that space is a space where you can feel flow and a nourishment instead of striving and fighting.
Yeah, flow. Exactly. Flow is exactly it. And that struggling comes when you got resistance going on and you got that negative transference. And now I know how better to work with that. I say, who did you take care of it? Because as soon as there's resistance, I know there has to be a holes and rolls topic. So I sidestep all the attacks and stuff like that. I remember telling one person, he says, he was so vicious and nasty at me. And he says, can you handle that? I said, sure. I've met your relatives all over the world, because they think they're the only angry person. That's part of the Messiah complex. Because when you fill holes and rolls, you're the only, and then you think you're Satan, you're the only killer on the universe. Mm-hmm. And it was a bit of a come down sometimes for them to feel, there are other killers out there.
Right.
That's just a bit of humor. But I've learned how not to take it so personally when all the stuff is shooting at me, when that does happen, when they tell you, what are you trying to do, this fairy tale fantasy stuff, and all that. And then I just go for the holes and rolls part. Mm-hmm. So, and I guess what I'm saying here, some of it has a play element. I feel like somewhere I'm playing. I don't know how to put that any other way.
Yeah.
Separate from the sacred. There's something about play in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not so separate because in a way it's not a place where you're holding the world on your shoulders.
Yeah, exactly.
But, the playing is possible if you don't have to do that.
You don't have to be Atlas carrying the universe. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
This recording is part of the Proactive Mindfulness podcast. We explore how to be more present and engaged in our lives and how to make lasting change. This is a contemporary take on mindfulness informed by embodied therapy and the polyvagal theory. You can find more articles and videos on the website proactivemindfulness.com.